And today I want to talk some about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I know that is surprising to you in consideration that we're discussing this week and reading it. Now, I read this novella first long ago. I was in high school when I read it. And I'm sure that I have read it since then, but rereading it this time, I noticed things that were not impressive or were not impressed upon my young mind. But now that I'm much more knowledgeable and am reading it from the point of view of examining it as an example of Victoriana, there were things that I noticed that I had not noticed before. And in the discussion, I asked about the passage in chapter 2 where Utterson notes that Dr. Jekyll had been wild in his youth, and that perhaps this will to where his goods go to Dr. Hyde was a result of whatever happened in his past. And I take that as meaning that that Utterson, not Dr. Utterson, he's a liar, thinks that perhaps Hyde was or is an illegitimate child of Jekyll's that he was not aware of, and suddenly or over a period of time, whichever, Hyde insinuates himself into Jekyll's life and perhaps even threatens to blackmail him for his youthful indiscretion. And this whole thing about this passage really stuck with me this time is that we see Dr. Jekyll in his later years as pretty much presented as a paragon of virtue. He is an upright, outstanding citizen. He's a doctor. He's well respected. But yet we learn that in his youth he was wild. So while we see this dichotomy of Hyde versus Jekyll, and Jekyll being the upright citizen, and Hyde incorporating all of the vile things of humanity, running over a child and other excesses, we think that they are exactly the opposite. But Jekyll, even if his indiscretions when he were younger were not evil, they were still I hesitate to use the word immoral or unethical, but if Utterson is thinking that Hyde is a product of a liaison with a woman and is illegitimate, then that would have been considered immoral by the Christian standards of the Victorian period. And even in other circles, such as spiritualist circles, that might also be considered immoral or unethical. And so even though we see Hyde as a manifestation of everything that Jekyll isn't, maybe he's not. We know that the two are the same person, for lack of a better word, the same man, and represent the opposite sides of a spectrum of good and evil. But perhaps that kernel that Jekyll had in his youth when he was wild has truly manifested itself in Hyde, but perhaps those aspects had been brewing in Jekyll all along, and then with the scientific aspects, the potions and so on, then perhaps Hyde truly is an aspect of Jekyll that has been hidden and has been submerged. Now, this application of these, it's not even bipolar, it's more like a multiple personality disorder than bipolarism. For the first time, we see some scientific aspect for why there is this dichotomy of actions or personas from one person. And I think I've touched on werewolves in the announcement for the week, and we had this dichotomy in the past, but it was judged by supernatural means. A person would become a werewolf, and I can't remember if there were female werewolves. Seems like I remember one, but most of the werewolves that you read in mythology prior to that were male. And so this aspect of the werewolf being the evil part of a man. It was from supernatural. My cat just meowed outside and she distracted me. Was due to natural means, whereas in this novella, it is due to scientific means. It is still tapping into the same aspect. The werewolf is everything that the man isn't. But does the werewolf project something that is within the human? And of course, a werewolf differs from the transformation of Jekyll in that a person who becomes a werewolf can't control that. Dr. Jekyll, he takes a potion. It is a scientific aspect. Now, whether or not he could prevent that later might be up for grabs, but it is entirely voluntary on his part. And even if he doesn't realize what this is going to do, it was still voluntary, whereas with a werewolf, it was not. Now, there are shapeshifters, but shapeshifters are very different than werewolves, and I'm not going to go into that. So we have these two, again, ends of the spectrum, and they are seem to be exact opposites, but are they? Does Jekyll's earlier aspect still manifest itself? But I'm not going to belabor that or keep going into that. Now, Freud had been writing for quite some time by this time, and I don't know if Stevenson was cognizant of Freud's theories or not. But of course, Freud said there was the id, the reptilian part of the human brain that was responsible for evil thoughts or actions. And there was the ego, which in putting in layperson's term was all of us. And then there was the superego that transcends our humanity and is the epitome of being ethical and moral and so on and so on. It's what rises above the baseness of humans. So is Hyde the id? Is Jekyll the ego, or is he the superego? Because I don't see him as the superego. I see him more as the ego, and for several reasons. One is because he is willing to experiment without knowing what is going to happen. And okay, I said I wasn't going to go back to it, but he was wild in his youth. Whether he transcended that aspect of his youth to manifest a superego, I truly don't know. But we see not only science applied to this, and that the transformation is brought about not by supernatural means, but we also see psychology coming into effect here, whether or not Stevenson was cognizant of Freud's theories or not. And I guess I should do some research on that, so perhaps I will. But I also want to go back to and discuss a little bit about the religious aspects of this. Christianity says that humans are flawed. We are imbued with original sin. And of course, original sin goes back to the myth of the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve transgressing against Yahweh and getting kicked out of the garden. What is the original sin? I say it's disobedience. And I say it is disobedience because Adam and Eve really got into trouble for not obeying the word of Yahweh. And Eve, hearkening back to last week's lessons and discussions about week before last about women, Eve got the brunt of the blame for that. She was the one who first ate of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It wasn't an apple. And Adam ate second, and Adam blamed her. The first thing he did, he said, well, she enticed me to eat. But Yahweh does not get upset and does not get angry until Adam eats. He doesn't make an appearance when Eve eats. Now, Adam got the news from Yahweh firsthand. Eve got it secondhand from Adam. So why does Eve get all of the blame? Well, I would say, and it's nothing original with me, and that is for sure, and I am not the first one to note that things didn't fall apart until Adam ate, was got to have a scapegoat. You got to blame somebody. And so Eve got that along with Pandora in Greek myth, and women were blamed for the downfall of humanity, and based on that myth of Adam and Eve. And even Martin Luther, who should have been a paragon of virtue, made the comment that if women suffered or died in childbirth, that's okay, because that's what they were born to do. But back to how this applies to Jekyll and Hyde. If humans have the id, is that the same as original sin? And when Jekyll takes the potion and transform, then is Hyde a manifestation of the id and of original sin that is within human? And how do we suppress that? Jekyll had been pretty successful up until now, but had he truly been pure in and out and good in and out, and only the superego applied to him at that point, would he have transformed into Hyde? So I'm going to stop on that. I have more to say about this, and I love this novel because in relation to the Victorian era, because it is just representative of so many things within that time period. But I'm stopping now.